I'd like to start this discussion with a quote from Václav Havel. And it's really important to all of us, but now more than ever. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. How do you feel about that quote today?
I keep going back to Havel because for me it was a point of moral grounding. I mean, Havel was also the way in which I first came to former communist Europe. I was 17 when communism fell. I was 17 in November 1989. I started reading Havel. It was a very romantic story. The whole story owes everything to Paul Wilson, because had it not been for his beautiful translations, which I read long before I learned Czech, I never would have come to this. And
I
it
was
was
so surprised. You speak Czech. This is so unbelievable, and it will be so unbelievable for our people. So,
No,
sorry.
můžeme zkusit mluvit česky. Je to strašně
Oh
dávno od té doby, když se posledně mluvili česky. Napravdu hodně jsem zapomněla, ale no stýska se mi po češtině. No to bylo první jazyk, no, který
Mluvíte
jsem...
krásně, but we would, for the purpose of the titles, it would be so. You speak even better than my. So it sounds even better than my English, but for the purposes of the podcast,
your English is much better. I've forgotten. So I speak Polish a lot more often than I speak Czech, and now I have to think about when I'm speaking what are the Polish words and the Russian words and the Czech words, and they all kind of get Ukrainian words, and they all kind of get mixed up. But no, I miss it. Czech was the first language that I really lived in, that I really felt like the world existed for me in Czech. And I learned Czech because I was reading Havel. And, in fact, recently I gave an interview to Polish Newsweek a couple weeks ago. And Sławek Sierakowski, who did the interview, said, that he was so grateful for my honesty and sincerity, that like he hadn't heard that in a long time. And I said, I can either talk or I cannot talk, but I wouldn't know how to speak otherwise than truthfully. And that is the result of having encountered that legacy of people like Havel and Adam Michnik when I was at a young and impressionable age. I was intellectually formed by that tradition, even though I was American, that to be a writer means you speak the truth. And I cling to that now in these post-truth times. I still find that that's our only grounding. You have to be a writer means you speak the truth. You have to start with the truth without a grounding in the distinction between truth and falsehood. We don't have any basis to make a distinction between good and evil. So Havel was a tremendous influence on me in that sense. Žít v pravdě, the slogan of the revolution. Žít v pravdě, co to znamená žít v pravdě? Yeah. We're still asking ourselves that in these very different times.
Yeah, in totally different times, but the question still stands, right?
How did you get to know him, Havel? What was the story?
The story was I was an American teenager searching for something. In my biography, the juxtaposition that happened was the suicide of Abby Hoffman in spring of 1989, and then the revolution, the Velvet Revolution of November 1989. Because the suicide of Abby Hoffman for me was such a moment of extreme disillusionment, that the revolution was over, that we had succumbed to bourgeois superficiality, that nobody cared about values anymore, that nobody cared about liberation. And then, then communism fell. And what for me, Havel was ushering into the public sphere a completely different kind of language. And it was a language I didn't know. And not only did I not know Czech, but it was a language that I didn't even know in some sense in English. Like when pravda was the first word I learned in Czech. And it was not a coincidence that it was the first word I learned in Czech. It was the first word I learned in Czech because the people I was talking to were using it as if it were as real as the keys that you could hold in your hand and put in your pocket. And I thought about that again in 2019 when Alexander Vindman was testifying at Trump's first impeachment trial. Yeah. And he closed his opening statement, by saying, "Don't worry, Dad. Here I don't have to be afraid to tell the truth." And I thought, that is not the American truth. That's really pravda, the way that, Havel would say žít v pravdě, the way that the dissidents talked about pravda as that thing that could liberate you, the thing that you would stake your hope and your life on, the thing that had the power to cut through the lies, the epistemological move that was simultaneously an ethical move. And when I heard Vindman say that, I just wanted to hug him. I thought that that's, only somebody who was formed by the Soviet experience would have that faith in truth, because who any longer believes in truth? Now it's all passé. But it was very important to me. It was part of what drew me to this part of the world. And it's still what I cling to. This idea that we have to ground ourselves in truth and you can't give up, that is our only hope.
Yeah. Actually, I said in the beginning that we are living now in a totally different era. But when it comes to the relation to truth and reality, it feels like that it comes back in a certain way from what we lived during the communist era. Was everyone knew it's just pretended fake reality, right. But no one spoke up. Everyone pretended like, yeah, I believe it too. Of course, except of people who lived in like dissident circles. But the majority of the population just pretended that everything is normal and that the newspeak is normal and that the lies coming from media are normal. I have slowly the feeling that America, what comes, the recipe for the algorithmic coup coming from America, like mixing our reality with pseudo facts and lies and manipulations, that people everywhere start like feeling the same. Okay, it might be maybe everything is lies, but we will pretend, we will stick to our tribe in order not to lose the only certainty we have. Maybe my tribe is lying, but I will stick with it because that's the only certain thing I got, like my MAGA tribe or my democratic tribe. So people are no longer looking for truth. They lost the words have another meaning, like homeland or like facticity or fake news. Even Donald Trump keeps repeating fake news. Like everything has a different meaning, like it had during the communist era. The falsely created meanings, new contexts, false contexts. And people feel tired.
This has been, in some ways, the question that's been most preoccupying me. Like, what is similar and what is different? Marx, of course, famously says about Hegel that history repeats itself. The first time is tragedy, the second is farce. And so trying to understand the role of lies in this post-truth world, I've been really trying to grapple with what is similar and what is different. I mean, one of the reasons that Havel was so important is that in Bezmocnik, he really lays out, a kind of almost phenomenological description of what truth and lies mean in this post-Stalinist era, which was quite different from what they meant in the Stalinist era. Yeah. The Stalinist era, you have much more that model that Hannah Arendt describes as the modern political lie that is a complete reconstruction of reality in such a way as to be seamless. And while it is false, has an internal consistency and coherence that is much greater than actual reality, because all of the arbitrariness that is the actual condition of real life has been edited out. And so in Stalinist times, you had everything spun together in a very tight story, which was false, but had its own logic and was leading somewhere. And then in Moc bez mocných, Havel is describing that time when everyone knows that the emperor is naked. Everyone knows that the Grand Inquisitor himself does not believe in God. The green grocer hangs that sign, the Zélinage hangs that sign in his window, and he knows he's lying, and the customers know he's lying, and the regime knows that they're lying, and the people know that the regime knows that they know, and everybody knows that everybody knows, but they just kind of keep going on with this pretend game. And so there's this lie that the green grocer, that Zélinage is telling to everybody, but everybody knows it's a lie. But then Havel says there's another layer of lies. There's the lie that, in French, you would say in Sartre's terms, mauvaise foi. You would call it bad faith, self-deception. There's the lie that the Zélinage is telling to himself about his own powerlessness, that he cannot possibly do otherwise. And Havel is saying there are these two layers of lies. There's a lie that is for the outside world, that everybody knows is a lie, that the greengrocer is telling about his belief in communism. And there's a lie he's telling to himself that he doesn't have a choice. And the more morally corrosive lie is the lie that he's telling to himself about the fact that he doesn't have a choice. Which was why it was such a beautiful moment for me when I saw Mark Carney stand up at Davos,
exactly,
and talk about
we
the
were like,
gross.
What? He's voting? No way!
It's like, so take down the signs. It was so satisfying.
There was such a moment when the entire Czech population just holds still. What did the leader of the free world is quoting Havel? What happened? So
I was so happy. For the past 20 years, I have made all my students read Moc bez mocných, and it seemed like an obscure niche Czech dissident text. And now I felt vindicated that, nobody should graduate until they've read that text. And I said, yes,
my gosh.
Take down the signs. It's a very striking text because Havel is indicting the whole population. He's saying the line between victim and oppressor runs de facto through each one of us. That everyone in his or her own way is both a victim and a supporter of the system. It's the greengrocers who allow it to go on in the first place. And it's as a phenomenon of how these tyrannical systems implicate everybody so that there is no innocent space. It was a revelatory text. And now we're all being implicated in a different way, but we're still all being implicated. Now there's this sense of, okay, now we just give up. And this is what I thought Peter Pomerantsev described so brilliantly in 2014 when that book first came out, that it's a new move in the history of truth and lies. Now it's not about making people believe something distinct and coherent that is a lie. It's about undermining the notion that there is any such thing as an ontological distinction between truth and lies. The Russian-American anthropologist Natalia Rudakova, in her Anthropology of the Russian Press, looks at the 1990s and says, paradoxically, epistemological realism survived in Soviet times. It crashes only in the 1990s when the value of telling the truth crashes. People cease to care about finding out what is the truth. And I think that was very prescient because it's both a kind of continuation and a variation on, I think, what we were seeing in the 20th century. And we're still struggling to understand that. I was talking with Paul Wilson just a few days ago when he was here. What would Havel have said if he could have imagined troll factories?
Yeah.
The idea that Hannah Arendt wrote about factories for the purpose of producing corpses, the innovation of the Nazis. Now we have factories for the purpose of producing fictions. This was technologically unimaginable. in the 70s or the 80s. What do we do with that? It makes possible kinds of lies and assaults on truth that were inconceivable before that technology existed. And I'm still trying to get my mind around that. I don't know what we do with it.
Yeah. So right now, I think the Czech population is in a situation when they know about troll factories. They know the internet is just like a poisonous jungle where you can barely find the truth. But there is still that, what can I do? I'm too small. What can I do about it? There is nothing. These big oligarchs, now it's even worse because they are way richer than the Communist Party. These new oligarchs, they have so many zeros on their accounts, so that we feel even more powerless than 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, no, the role of kleptocratic oligarchy and its relationship to technology, and the relationship between the technological possibilities of disseminating narratives and the rise of kleptocratic oligarchy and post-truth as a kind of intellectual, let's call it, phenomenon. I think those things are clearly deeply interrelated, but we're still trying to figure out exactly how. I mean, when I think I know so little, I know so little about how the financial system works. I've never understood how it works. I've never really understood money. I don't understand how, everyone can lose money. Isn't there a law of conservation of matter? Money, that when you take materialism to the highest degree, it becomes metaphysics. Money is actually only imaginary. But it feels to me like we're in this world where the Hegelian distinction obtained that quantity turns into quality, that changes in scale turn into changes in kind. It's one thing to say that inequalities in wealth are the necessary price of freedom, that somebody is going to be making $50,000 a year, someone's going to be making $75,000 a year, someone's going to be making $100,000 a year. But what do you do when, 50% of the country's wealth is concentrated in the hands of 10 people?
Yes.
That's a change in scale that's become a change in kind. That really is what Hegel was talking about when quantity turns into quality. You've crossed some kind of border in which you're in a different phenomenon. I mean, one of the fatal moments in American politics, as you know, was the Citizens United ruling in 2010.
2010.
Right. When the Supreme Court decided that, contributing to political campaigns was a kind
unlimited.
of free speech. Right. Yeah. And that logic might obtain when, someone's donating $10, someone's donating $25, someone's donating $50. What happens when you have somebody like Elon Musk with an unlimited amount of money who can buy an election? That's a change in scale. That's become a change in kind. And we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. And that's probably the same problem we all have in Central Europe, in America, everywhere. This concentration of wealth allows, in the technological era, such a huge disbalance, because when you have this amount of money, you can buy spy software, algorithms, a huge amount of psychological data on internet. So it gives you all the weapons you need to play with brains of our normies and make sure the election, that the people you just get their brains out of their head 2 weeks before the election, and that the people go. And the funny thing is that they even changed the meaning of words. We could describe the entire situation. The people who have been already brainwashed are speaking about free speech. Everyone is sheep. You are sheeps, and freedom. And now when we start to talk about freedom, homeland, and free speech, we feel like, oh, wait a minute, we are the second here, and someone changed the meaning. So they even stole our ability to speak about that in proper terms.
It's completely terrifying. And we had Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, come into power, and the first thing he did was take food away from starving children in Sudan. And that's a particularly high level of cruelty.
Horrific, yeah. And that's
you know what our yeah, go Natalie, go. I've
nobody
spoken too
knows
much.
this year. That's something nobody reports this year. That almost 600,000 people will die from dismantling USAID. So that's not reported here. So my question is, and this is what I really fear, we all kind of count on America is going to wake up, they're going to realize, and they're going to stand up and take down the regime.
Someone else will.
And then I have these moments when I'm like, I'm not so sure. And this is just a simple question that I have. Are Americans capable in some period of time to really change the system?
I'm going to go back to your original Havel quote here and say that we have to have hope that that's possible. I do believe that it's possible. There's real resistance. But America, like the United States, like a country like Poland, is a very divided country. And it's more or less divided down the middle, as you see in the presidential elections, that a very small handful of people in a handful of swing districts and a handful of swing states and decide the election. It's not as if there's no opposition. It's not as if nobody understands what's going on. And that's true both among ordinary people on the ground, and it's also true in Washington. And there are people in Washington I would trust personally. I would trust Jamie Raskin, Jasmine Crockett, AOC, Chris Murphy. It's not that there's nobody who sees what's going on. The problem is those people are not in power at the moment, and what has happened is the whole Republican Party has gotten in line in an absolutely terrifying way. I've been completely preoccupied with returning to this Faustian motif. Jan Patočka in the 1970s, one of his last long texts was about Faust, which he was originally published actually in Polish. His friend Irena Kranska did the Polish translation, and he went back to Christopher Marlowe's version, and then to Goethe's version, and then to Thomas Mann's version. But there are people, I think, like Trump and like Vance, who I think there's just no moral compass there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's just absolutely like no sense of a self with any idea of right or wrong. But there are plenty of other people, like let's say, Lindsey Graham, and Marco Rubio, Mike Johnson, who must know they have sold their souls to the devil. Like they know what they're doing. They've made this bargain with evil. And I have been preoccupied with trying to understand that Faustian motif. Why do people do that? What, like Marco Rubio would clearly prefer that there be a different, Republican administration in power. He would like to be in power. He doesn't like what's happening in foreign policy, but he is going along with it, to stay in power.
He never challenges that.
No. I mean, watching him at that Oval Office meeting with Zelensky,
yes,
I thought, how
could he stay there or sit there and even just be silent?
I know. I ask. This is the question. This is what I would love to know. Like, what is when Lindsey Graham said after that meeting? I mean, I told this to Heidi right afterwards. That Lindsey Graham got on television right after that horrific Oval Office meeting with Zelensky, February of last year, and said Donald Trump has just given us a masterclass in putting America first. And I rage tweeted back at him. I said, no, Donald Trump has just given us a masterclass in moral nihilism. And Lindsey Graham has just given us a masterclass in selling your soul to the devil. Lindsey Graham has been to Kiev. He knows, he knows he's on the side of evil there. And I have not been able to get my mind around this. Tiger Mom, Amy Chua, my former colleague at Yale, who was one of the creators of J.D. Vance. I thought, you sell your soul to the devil to get invited to fancy parties in Washington? I mean, how do you look your children in the eye after you've done that? Yeah. Knowing that you're enabling, power to work itself out in such a way that, hundreds of thousands of people are going to be starving in Africa. Like, don't you have that on your conscience?
Yeah, there was this famous picture or photo how the Russian embassy in London trolled Lindsey Graham with his own photo being somewhere on the roof on Moscow, on a hotel in Moscow, swimming, obviously naked. No idea who did that picture. So there is so much. There must be, because we Czechs, we've heard a lot about the corruption and money laundering. Everyone understands that money makes people like nuts. That there is a new aspect we never spoke about, and it came first with Epstein, and this is the role of Kompromat. How this thing can destroy human lives at scale. So it was probably the largest Kompromat operation in the modern history. Yeah. And people first learn, what does it mean when you use this kind of operations, and how does it work?
And Kompromat is an old thing. I mean, Kompromat is a Soviet thing, and provokacja goes back to the Tsarist Empire. It goes back, pre-Soviet. So in some sense, these are old tricks, right? Being rehashed. And then I ask myself, people ask me all the time, why is Trump in Putin's pocket? Is it Kompromat? Is it affinity? Is it admiration? Is it gratitude for his assistance in the 2016 election? And I don't have any inside information. It could be any of those things. It could be a combination. It's interesting that Kompromat can even work in these days where anything can be AI generated. So you can just, you can generate any crazy video of anything. So whatever you have, and so many grotesque things about this man have come out. Like, what could there possibly still be, that would actually be disqualifying? Because it seems that there is no disgusting thing this man has done that will turn his base away from him. But the phenomenon of Epstein, for me, what I was learning from the recent release of files, I'm not an expert on the Epstein files, but what struck me was that the scale was much larger than I had thought. The sheer number of people involved and implicated, and the amount of material being gathered. And I think, where did these people come from, and what are they doing? I'm not such an idealist. I realize that people are not perfect, that there are no messiahs, that people will cheat on their taxes, that people who don't have enough money will steal things. I know that a certain percentage of students will panic and will plagiarize a paper. But raping a child, trafficking young girl, that's a level of evil and cruelty, and sadistic cruelty. That's in another category. That's not just cheating on your taxes, or plagiarizing a paper. That's a very high degree of evil, and that was so widespread and so accepted. That still shocks me.
Yeah, it was almost industrial level of recruitment of these sadists and people who have, because they just filtered. It was industrial level of recruitment. They filtered everyone who didn't appear malign enough, and worked on those people who had this narcissist dark triad something, and get them closer and closer and help them to elevate them in order to keep the system running. It's mind-blowing.
I wanted to ask, how many people do really read them and know what's in them, like per document? Not all 3 million or whatever, but how many people really realize what is in them in America?
It's a very good question. I felt like it was only starting to really penetrate the public sphere at the time of the Pam Bondi hearings that were so repulsive, when I felt like it was that's when it was really starting to reach out, when Jamie Raskin went in there and started to read things, and when the victims themselves started to mobilize and come forward. And then after Virginia Guthrie's memoir was published and that was excerpted. But then, of course, Trump distracted everybody by deciding that, we'll go invade Venezuela, we'll go start a war in Iran, we'll go distract people's attention by dropping some bombs, which, this was Steve Bannon's whole strategy of flooding the zone. And it works because nobody,
there's every just one time.
Yes, there's one catastrophe after another. Like nobody can focus. I can't focus either because every time you look at the news, there's something else that is so outrageous and grotesque that you're trying to get your mind around it. And by the time you start trying to figure it out, there's something else and then something else and then something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you read the Bible? We had a discussion with Alex, whether somebody has to though, but
yeah, but we had a dispute how to handle it, not like psychologically, because everyone handles it bad. Right. If you are not a sadist or just someone whose brain has been damaged, so everyone handles it bad. But how to work, if even to tell the people, because when you try to tell, the reaction is always the same. Oh, no, please don't. You just recycle or redistribute the trauma.
Yeah.
But no, I think this is a one shot, and they gave us, they had to give us at least a half of the shot. And we need to use it. Mm-hmm. So then I dive into them. I'm in them. I'm full of them. And it's really depressing. But then I'm like, and then I can't share it because I read such horrible shit that I cannot even share it. Some levels I can, but I have no idea. I think there was never a situation like this. I don't know how to treat Epstein files in America and especially Czech Republic.
Yeah. Because there is a certain commitment to truth, but on the other hand, the entire cognitive warfare works on a redistribution of trauma.
No, that's true. And I think for me, in some ways, the most fundamental shift from the communist period to today is that there had been an attempt to repress truth, to silence truth. And what the dissidents really believed, that if you could get that truth out there, it would have its own moral force. That truth itself had a moral force that would bring things down. And now we're in a different world. Now we're in this flooding the zone strategy, which is different from repressing truth. It was the mistake. We were too slow to understand it in the US during the first Trump administration. So many people, including a lot of my very smart, lawyer colleagues and friends, were so invested in the Mueller report because they were invested in this 20th century notion of truth, that, that these guys were serious, they were professionals, they were going to uncover the truth, and the truth was going to bring this tyranny down. Yeah. But the problem was that what had happened was not the problem was not the things we didn't know. There were things we didn't know, but they were effectively details. The problem was not what was concealed. The problem was what we had begun to normalize, what we had just begun to accept because we were so overwhelmed that we couldn't do otherwise. And we need a different set of strategies somehow to deal with this flooding, which was it was technologically not possible to flood people this way before. The idea that you can just disperse information on this scale around the world, this way so quickly, at such a rate, it's sui generis. We've never been at this historical moment before, and so we're always kind of playing catch up with a moving target to try to figure out what to do about it. And I look at this stuff. I have a 13-year-old daughter, who, came to me at a certain point, having, read or seen on the news part of this. And it then hit her that these girls, that some of them were her age, and she came to me in this state of how could they and this is my daughter, and I was at a loss. I was at a loss as to how to explain this kind of evil and this kind of cruelty. And what has happened, that we've lost a kind of immediate primordial moral intuition, that this is evil. Like as soon as this stuff came out, there should have been somebody should have been no, this is absolutely not. Like there should have been this collective, unanimous revolt and disgust, and we've lost that moral intuition. We're too used to seeing kids buried under rubble. We're too used to rape. We're too used to sex scandals. We're too used to like the bad guys winning. We're too used to saying, well, on the one hand, well, on the other hand, or who really knows, or there's this story and there's that story, and you have your facts and I have alternative facts. And Trump is sitting at that press conference with the Saudi prince who ordered the assassination
the dismembering of
who ordered that, and the journalist asked him a question and he's like, things happen. And this is like obnażenia of no, już nie ma żadna prawda. No, prawdy już nie ma.
In a suitcase.
Just blatantly right in front of your face. Things happen. That's what he said. Things happen.
It's just sometimes I think there must have been a strategy. This is a demoralization what we are looking at.
Yeah.
That's not simply lying or cognitive warfare or playing with people's brains. This is a large scale demoralization of the West.
Yeah. No, it's terrifying. I think we need to go back to, I feel like we need to go back to the 70s and 80s. And when people were talking about truth and lies and good and evil. I mean, I think back to when Adam Michnik wrote the letter to Czesław Kiszczak, from prison in Poland. I think it was 1983. And Kiszczak was the minister of the interior, keeping him in prison. And he said, listen, this might come as news to you, but there are two things in the world. There's good and there's evil. Yeah. Right. And we have to be aware that there's a distinction. Mm-hmm. And we've lost that sense of distinction in this, okay, maybe this, maybe that, who really knows, things happen.
Yeah.
And there is one truth.
There's factual reality. And, Arendt says that the vulnerability of factual reality as opposed to rational truth. So she's things like laws of physics and mathematics, the fact that 2 + 2 = 4, that's a priori rational truth. It's non-contingent. It doesn't involve doing anything or something that was or wasn't done. It's truth of logic. Whereas she says something like Germany invades Belgium in 1914, that's an empirical truth. It's a factual truth. It's contingent. It did not have to happen. It's a truth a posteriori because it did happen. And she said the vulnerability of factual truth is its original contingency. You can imagine a world in which Germany did not invade Belgium in 1914. It is not a law of physics. And therefore, factual truth is always going to be vulnerable to somebody telling you well, there's a much more logical version of the story I could tell you. And so that sense that we have to hold to actual fact, this is why journalists are on the front line. I gave an interview after the murder of that young Slovak investigative journalist several years ago to a Slovak newspaper. Yes, yeah, and he and his girlfriend, and I referenced Heidegger's famous or infamous last interview, "Only a God can save us now," and I said only the journalist can save us now. Somebody has to be out there, saying that this happened and not this. Somebody has to be out there documenting factual reality. Without that, we have no grounding. And that's what Arendt calls Bodenlosigkeit, groundlessness. The ground is pulled out from under us.
Yeah. Maybe it's also the problem that the ownership of media has been so badly mixed up with private interests. And this is right now, as we speak, in Czech Republic, there is a huge fight for the character of public TV going on because the recent government is trying to dismantle the public TV and make it their own governmental tool. So they are trying different strategies how to make the public TV more obedient. And people are ready. This is always the time when they touch the public TV and the public radio, people are almost immediately in the streets because they rightly feel that's the moment when it's time to fight.
And it is without knowing what's actually happening, we don't have any basis to make judgments.
Yeah. this is what Dugin says. So what is the fact? Fact is just the consensus, that's something what the majority of people agrees. So it's not a fact. It's the Russian way, the propaganda fact of the majority. You can brainwash majority of people and then they say, yes, this is the fact.
No, we have to be supportive of the independent journalist. It's the journalists who are on the front line. The journalists are on the front line. The secondary school teachers are on the front line. You know, the people whose job it is to make sure we have populations who are able to think, to ask questions, who care about thinking. You know, Arendt would say thinking is work.
Mm-hmm. It hurts.
I like that. It's true. Okay. It's exhausting.
It's true. Yeah.
What do you do to how to keep up some normal state of mind? How do you relax?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, one of the things I do is, because I do think that thinking is work and it's exhausting, and it's important to take responsibility for all of our words, and I find that exhausting, I go to spinning classes. The indoor cycling classes. And when you go to the indoor cycling classes, you have to lock your phone and you can't bring them in the studio, you know, and you're on a stationary bicycle. And then there's a whole hour that the instructor tells you what to do and you don't have to think. You know, and it's really, it's quite a safe space to abandon your responsibility for thinking, because you're on a stationary bicycle and there's a very limited number of commands. You can stand up, you can sit down, you can kind of turn the resistance up, you can turn the resistance down, but basically you're not going to lynch anyone. You're not going to be talked into doing anything horrible. Basically, you're just on a stationary bicycle. And I find that so calming, because it's a whole hour where I don't make any decisions. I just blindly follow the spinning instructor. I find that very calming. I find yoga very calming, but basically a lot of the rest of the time, right, is exhausting, and you're kind of wringing your hands.
I got one more question. I'm just recently listening to the audiobook of Ukrainian Night. And what is so absolutely captivating for me is that how the individual people on Ukraine ended up in the situation when there was no other way for them than to protest. And this is exactly the mystery how it happens. So when I remember, my dad once told me that in the year 89, the breaking moment was the message that they are beating our kids. They are beating our kids there. And then the moment came when everyone, including the communist supporters, just clicked and said, no. Just the moment, the turning point when everyone suddenly became the same camp. And we are still struggling, that the people in our republic, people still think that it's possible to believe a billionaire who lies basically every day, who speaks in an incoherent manner, and they know he lies, but they tolerate it because they want to just be left in peace. Just give me a break. No, yeah, he lies, but okay, so far so good. I'm okay with that. So we cannot find the moment when the people who don't care start suddenly care.
A revolution is always a miracle in some sense. Yeah. And there's always something spontaneous and unpredictable about it. You know, and it in retrospect, it so often looks inevitable. It's a teleological deception of retrospect. But it seemed impossible until the moment when it happened. Yeah. And exactly. I cling to that. Yeah, I cling to the fact that you never know. It's a collective action problem as well, right? Because any individual, I mean, this is what you also see in Havel and the Green Grocer, any individual thinking rationally has a reason to say that if I take part in this resistance action, the cost to me individually is going to be higher than the collective social benefit of my individual action. But of course, taken together, it's all of those individually rational decisions that collectively make tyranny possible. You know, and so you need that moment of a critical mass of people. a critical mass of people crossing to that other side of fear, and how that happens, why it happens. There's always something a bit unpredictable. I think about Romania in December 1989. That also seemed impossible until the moment it happens, and then it's over within 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love that. Yes, yes.
Yeah, the Czechs are usually very rational people. They don't love strong words and pathos and heroism. We are hobbits. We basically love our
but they're good workers. They work well.
Yeah, but suddenly, even when they did it once, I still keep hoping maybe we can do it again. When we are just waiting for the right moment for.
I definitely think that's
rationalize and gaslight ourselves very much. So no, it's been always that the government always stole money from people, and I'm too small to react and too small to engage. But it's obviously it was possible once.
Yeah.
So we keep hoping.
No, I do believe it's possible.
Okay.
I will continue to believe it's possible. And there are always those moments. One of the remarkable people who is a character in a real life character in my forthcoming book that I've been working on for a ridiculously long time is Miloslava Holubová, who is truly one of the great women of the 20th century who is now forgotten. And she was imprisoned in the Stalinist times. She survived the occupation, during the Second World War. She then survives Stalinist prison. She survives one thing after another, and she's in Prague in August 1968, when the invasion comes. And she writes this remarkable long letter to her son and daughter-in-law, and of documenting what's going on the streets with incredible moral clarity. And her friends are she's not alone. Her friends are kind of around her. And I think there are these pockets, there are these moments, and I continue to hold on to that. People should reread Miloslava Holubová. She's a somewhat obscure figure, largely forgotten, but really a truly remarkable woman. And she had this moment of encountering Milada Horáková in prison, in Stalinist prison.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's just a little moment where they make this connection shortly before Horáková's execution. But it was two of the great women of the 20th century, and this moment of connection right before death. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. Women, eh? Okay.
Women are fighters. Yeah.
Women
and Heda Margolius Kovály. Everybody should read Navlastnim Kuja. Do you know that book?
No. Could you repeat that one?
Heda Margolius Kovály. Rudolf Margolius'
Never heard about it.
Oh, okay, wait, this is scandalous. No, she was also one of the great forgotten women of the 20th century.
Okay.
So she was a Czech Jew, born, I think, in 1919. She survives Auschwitz. She survives also Theresienstadt. She survives a death march. She makes her way back to Prague. None of her former friends will take her in, not because they're anti-Semitic, but because they're afraid. She eventually connects with the resistance. She's in Prague during the Pražského povstání. And then her fiance from before the war, Rudolf Margolius, also miraculously survives the camp. He comes back, they get married, they join the Communist Party. And he then, of course, is one of the 14 people put on trial during the Slansky trial and executed.
Oh, there was Slansky's trial.
Margolius.
Okay. And I remember his name, but I had no idea he had a wife.
She is extraordinary. God. And she leaves after 1968, after the invasion. She ends up working at the library at Harvard for many years until she comes back to Prague in her old age in the 1990s. And she writes a memoir called Navlastní kůže.
Okay.
And
we should make a list of reading recommendations for our readers. So read this.
It's one of the most. It's a book I teach again and again in English translation. It's one of the most important books that it gets at that intersection of the Second World War and the Holocaust and Stalinism.
Yeah.
You know, and
it's something similar like Margaret Buber-Neumann, right?
Yes. And she's been
Same
through both
fate.
of those experiences. Yeah, and she's implicated in the Stalinist experience as well, because she and her husband joined the Communist Party. I did an interview with her in 1997 when she was living back in Prague, and for a feminist journal called Jednym Okem. And her English, she became a literary translator. Her English is fantastic. But because we were publishing the interview in Czech, I had to do it in Czech. And I was living in Warsaw at the time. I had just gotten to Warsaw a couple months earlier, and I was doing some dissertation research there. And I took the overnight train from Warsaw to Prague and went to her apartment, you know, and this woman who I was just in awe of the fact that she had survived and was mentally intact at all. She appears in one of Shkredsky's novels as the woman who has been to hell twice and is still very much alive. And as soon as I started talking to her, I started mixing up the Czech and the Polish, and I was very embarrassed, you know, and I started apologizing, and I said, I'm so sorry, you know, I'm not a native speaker, and my Czech is better than my Polish, but I've been in Warsaw, and so the Polish is at the front of my head. And she said, oh, don't worry, it's no problem at all. You know, when I was in Auschwitz, I used to talk to the Polish girls in Czech, and they spoke to me in Polish, and we always understood one another.
Oh my God.
And it was just, and she said it not at all sarcastically, almost with a kind of warmth and almost nostalgia, as if like her friends from high school or something. The Polish girls I knew in Auschwitz.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. You see, Czechs are usually afraid of speaking about heroism and tragic situation, and they always try to do their best to avoid any dramatic situation because they are very rational. But on the other hand, I can feel that the situation is changing right now. Natalie tells me every day, so you're not living there, you don't feel the spirit. The people finally, after so many years, people are finally filled with a motive to fight. Do not because they see what happened to Hungary, they see what happened to Slovakia. My sister herself, she's never been a political person. She never cared. And suddenly she's texting me every day. Did you see what happened to Hungary? There is just champagne going on, and everything looks so hopeful. So I think the time is coming when the people suddenly, I think that's why we started Radio Free America, that we try to tell them, let's get together. That the time has come, we need to stick together, because this is what exactly the Silicon Valley guys are trying to do. Oh my God, Natalie says, please say sorry for me, my computer just collapsed. This is happening to her every second interview.
Oh, don't worry. But you know what, you should revive, you should make young Czechs, you know, like reread Milada Horákova's last letters written in Pankratz. They're amazing letters, you know, that she writes to her father, to her daughter, to her husband. You know, Miloslava Holubová cesto necesto. Like, you know, there are precedents, and like Czechs should be rereading these people and thinking about what, you know, good and evil and truth and lies and hope mean. You know, there are precedents in this culture, in this language, for people to go back to.
Okay. We should do it. Yeah. We probably get too much used to it that nothing's gonna change, and that the big world, we are too small. This is our national letter. We are too small to change anything. Such a small state, such a small nation, small people. But we got what it takes. We just need to get together and reread, as you say.
You know about Amos Oz's Order of the Teaspoon?
No.
Okay, so Amos, so my late Austrian friend Martin Polak, who was a determined fighter for truth. He was the son of an SS officer who was unflinching about it, and he used to wear a teaspoon pin. And I asked him once, what it meant, and he said, "Well, I'm a member of Amos Oz's Order of the Teaspoon." And Amos Oz, the Israeli writer, had this idea that if there is a great crisis or tragedy like a fire, there are various ways one can respond. Some people will just run away, and whoever can't run away fast enough, that's their problem. Some people will, complain to somebody else and ask somebody else to fix it. And then there's a third group of people that say, okay, there's a fire, I need to get a hose and put it out. Well, what if there is no hose? Well, then you get a bucket. Well, what if there's no bucket? Well, then you get a bowl. Well, what if there's no bowl? Well, then you get a teaspoon. Everyone has a teaspoon, and maybe a teaspoon is small and maybe it doesn't hold that much water. But if millions and millions of us are all there putting out the fire with our teaspoon, we have a chance to do something. So this was Amos Oz's order of the teaspoon.
Oh my God.
And actually my Slovak American couple friends, Gabriela Bolisova and Mark Isaac, these artists who are also based in Prague, who you should meet, they use a lot of Martin Pollock's work, and they bought me in Italy these beautiful teaspoon earrings. I should have worn them today.
We can call this interview a teaspoon
order
club.
of the teaspoon. Yes.
I
cling to that. And it's very much in Havel's spirit of you can take down the sign. Everybody can do something.
Okay. This is such a perfect ending to our interview, and this is exactly what I needed for our listeners to hear, that everyone needs, we can even produce some small, that's a brilliant idea. small teaspoons for Radio Free America. Professor Shore, thank you so very much. This has been such an amazing time. I had no idea that, and I'm almost ashamed that I had no idea that we had such a great women in our recent history. So we have to reread, and we need to look back, because we are not a small nation. We just everyone needs the teaspoon, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time.
Já moc krát vám děkuju, to bylo velice
děkuju vám.
Přeji hodně štěstí.
Děkujeme moc, děkujeme.